From MTN News, this is Montana This Morning.
Good Tuesday morning. It's 4:30. Welcome to Montana This Morning. I'm Victoria Hill. Thank you so much for getting your day started with us. Your election day, too.
That's right. Yeah, we've got a lot going on today, and we're going to start off with the weather with the first interstate ICAM. We're still on track for some really warm temperatures as we get into the next few days. We actually set some records. I'll tell you about that after a little bit. 55 is the starting temperature this morning. That's like about where we would normally be for a daytime high this time of year. A west wind about 15 miles an hour. So far, November is off to the same kind of start that October was. We're starting off with all the warm and dry conditions, and then things will crater as we start getting later into the month, except it's going to happen fairly soon as we start getting towards the weekend. This morning, only 20 up in Kalispell, where we have some areas of fog, but otherwise 57 this morning for you in Livingston. How about 62 in Cody, Wyoming to get started this morning? 52 in Sheridan, 39 for you in Miles City. You can see those 50s down the east slopes of the Rockies, but we also, there's some wind. Livingston, not especially strong, but sustained winds at 22, gusting up to 33. And Cody, you've got a little bit of a breeze, as does Billings this morning. So for southern Montana and northern Wyoming, looking at those morning temperatures, a mix of, well, mainly 40s and 50s and a few low 60s into the mix as well. A little colder for you at 29 in Basin, 31 in Graybull this morning, stuck down in the basin. Temperatures will be warming up today. Got a decent shot of hitting 70 degrees by later in the afternoon, much as we did yesterday. We'll talk more about all of that coming up in a few minutes.
All right, sounds good, man. After that snow and cold we had last month, I did not see a day like yesterday coming. I thought those days were long gone. I'm sure that could also mean our cold days are not long gone.
Things have a way, that pendulum has a way of
Yeah.
swinging, so, yep.
All right, well, we will wait and see what you have to say, but in the meantime, I will get to the news. Thanks,
Okay,
Ed.
thanks.
Our top story this Tuesday, it's finally election day. Polls open at 7 o'clock this morning, and here in Montana, it's one of the biggest elections in 2 decades. As MTN chief political reporter Mike Dennison tells us, the ballot is chock full of races with both statewide and national significance.
This year, it's an election like none you've ever seen, and in Montana, perhaps even more so. Let's start with the voting process. In 45 counties, the regular polling places are closed today because of the COVID-19 pandemic. But ballots have been mailed to all registered voters in these counties, including in the state's 8 most populous, which contains 70% of the voters statewide. The result has been a record high number of ballots cast, and thousands more voters will be turning in their ballots today in person or showing up to register to vote. They'll also be going to the polls in those 11 counties that chose not to go to all-mail ballots. As for the statewide contest in Montana, President Trump is expected to win the state over Democrat Joe Biden. The only question may be by how much. But in the other major races, closer contests are the norm. Montana will choose a new governor among Republican Greg Gianforte, Democrat Mike Cooney, and Libertarian Lyman Bishop. Gianforte has spent $7.5 million of his own money on the race, trying to win a seat that he narrowly lost 4 years ago and become the first Republican governor here in 16 years. Voters also will choose a new Attorney General, Secretary of State, and State Auditor, a contested seat for the Montana Supreme Court, and 2 new members of the State Public Service Commission. They'll elect a new legislature, but party control shouldn't change much from its current makeup of Republican majorities at 58-42 in the House and 30-20 in the Senate. Montanans also will choose a new U.S. House representative, Democrat Kathleen Williams or Republican Matt Rosendale, who are in what's expected to be a close contest for a seat that Republicans have held for 24 years. And finally, the biggest race in the state, the $160 million plus battle for a U.S. Senate seat between Republican incumbent Steve Daines and Democratic Governor Steve Bullock. All polls point to a photo finish, which may not be decided until late tonight or tomorrow morning when all the votes are counted. The winner of this contest could determine which party controls the U.S. Senate and therefore a bellwether for the future course of the nation. It doesn't get much bigger than that. So if you haven't voted, get on down to the county election office today. As I said, it's an election like none we've ever seen. Reporting from Helena, Mike Dennison, MTN News.
Voters have until 8 o'clock tonight to cast their ballot, drop it off, or register and vote. At last check here in Yellowstone County, 77% of voters have already cast their ballot. It's already a new record, besting the old number by 5,000 votes. If you haven't voted yet, there are 12 ballot drop-off locations today in Yellowstone County. You can find all of them in this story at ktvq.com. With the record-breaking numbers, local election officials are thankful for a new law allowing them to unseal and begin counting ballots prior to Election Day. As Q2's Jay Cohn reports, it's just what the doctor ordered as the COVID-19 pandemic forced much of Montana to an all-mail-in election.
Let the counting begin. The number of votes cast this election year already has set a new record across Montana. Now the hard part, counting those thousands of ballots. As you can imagine, the process of opening, flattening, and getting those ballots ready to be counted is both labor intensive and time consuming.
It really is. Our choke point is actually human hands unfolding paper. You know, the machines run pretty quickly, but they're not that, you got to wait for the paper to put through them. So it just takes a little bit of time.
Election Administrator Brett Rutherford in Yellowstone County credits election officials across the state who recognized the huge surge in people choosing to vote absentee in many of the past elections. They got the legislature to pass a new law and took action to lessen the load on Election Day and night.
Senator Roger Webb carried Senate Bill 162 for us, and basically we were allowed to open the secrecies last Thursday and Friday and get them flattened out and ready to count, and we actually started counting today, the day before Election Day, which will help out immensely. We didn't write the bill thinking there'd be a pandemic, so it doesn't solve all of our problems, but it sure does help.
Presidential election years are always the most stressful on election officials, but this year may take the cake. Made even more stressful this year with numerous lawsuits challenging everything from the mail-in election itself to the deadline for turning in ballots to restricting the number of ballots one person can collect and turn in. All those suits making their way through the court system as Election Day drew near.
I don't expect the lawsuits to stop. I bet they keep going after Election Day. So we just got to roll with it. If we get new directives, we do what we got to do.
Even with a day's jump start on counting ballots, officials say to expect many of the races not to be finalized until Wednesday afternoon or later. So patience will definitely be a virtue for all of us in this 2020 election year, an election year like no other. In Billings, I'm Jay Cohn reporting for MTN News.
With this year's early ballot counting, Rutherford expects the first vote totals released at 8 o'clock tonight will be a much larger sample than in past years. We'll be the first with those early numbers, so keep it here on Q2 for complete election night coverage beginning at 4 o'clock this afternoon. One of the staffers running Republican Greg Gianforte's campaign for governor has been fired for vandalizing a woman's car in Bozeman. A police report shows former campaign manager Daniel Duffy opened his car door and repeatedly slammed it into a vehicle parked next to him. The incident happened last Monday, but the police report was filed 2 days later. Originally, both parties agreed to work it out without pressing charges, but the owners of the vandalized car changed their minds. They said their decision to file a report wasn't political. Gianforte's campaign released a statement saying the fired Duffy as soon as they learned of the incident. Nationally, the long and grueling presidential campaign is reaching its climax today, but it's likely not the end. While millions of voters have already cast a ballot for either President Trump or former Vice President Joe Biden, millions more will head to the polls today. It's unclear if we'll know the winner tonight, as some states could take days to count all the ballots. CBS's Skylar Henry explains.
President Trump and Joe Biden each visited cities with historical significance yesterday.
We can be a little bit superstitious.
The president held a midnight rally in Grand Rapids, Michigan, just as he did before his 2016 victory.
Tomorrow we're going to make history once again.
The former vice president was in Pittsburgh, where he kicked off his campaign in 2019.
Because you represent the backbone of this country. Hard-working families. We're asking nothing but a fair shot.
Throughout the day, both candidates urged Americans to vote.
Get your family, get your neighbors, get your co-workers, get your boss, grab them by the tie, say, let's go, boss.
I believe the message is going to be loud and clear. It's time for Donald Trump to pack his bags and go home.
Voting during the coronavirus pandemic has reshaped the election process. At least 98 million ballots have already been cast. That's more than double the early vote in 2016.
5 voters in Dixville Notch, New Hampshire kept their midnight tradition alive, casting the first in-person votes on Election Day.
5 votes for Joe Biden.
In some states, it may take days to count all the votes, so legal experts are urging patience.
What would actually be a failure would be if we failed to count legitimately cast ballots simply because of some arbitrary cutoff.
President Trump plans to spend tonight at the White House, while Biden has 2 more events in Pennsylvania today. Skylar Henry, CBS News, Alexandria, Virginia.
Vice presidential candidate Kamala Harris will campaign in Detroit today before meeting up with Biden in Delaware to watch the returns come in. Vice President Pence returns to Washington. As far as election security goes, it's been all hands on deck. U.S. officials are expanding their operation to try and identify Russian, Iranian, and Chinese hackers. They believe those countries want to influence this year's election results. According to a top cyber official, Russia has recently engaged in some concerning online activities, and Iran has been conducting targeted disinformation efforts. Officials are confident that vote counting and certification systems are secure. Still, the national security community is on high alert. On to court news. A Carroll College football player is facing felony charges for allegedly raping a woman in Helena. 20-year-old Jacob Metters from California appeared in court yesterday on an aggravated sexual intercourse without consent charge. The incident happened Saturday night. A woman says Metters forced himself on her after being told no multiple times. Police say she had injuries consistent with sexual assault, and Metters changed his story several times in interviews. His bond was set at $40,000. Now we go to Glacier National Park, where an 18-year-old Missoula woman died in a scuba diving accident. The victim was part of a group of 6 people who started their dive near the dock of Lake McDonald Lodge. Another member of the group was flown to Seattle with injuries related to the accident. Right now, officials still don't know exactly what went wrong and are investigating. No other details about the incident were released, including the names of those involved. In COVID news, the U.S. is averaging more than 80,000 new coronavirus cases per day. Hospitalizations are at record highs in 14 states. Because of that, medical experts are warning if the upward trend doesn't reverse soon, mandatory lockdowns may become necessary. They say PPE is running low and healthcare workers are reaching their breaking point. Another concern across the country is cases in children. More than 61,000 kids tested positive last week alone, and that's the biggest increase in children's cases since the start of the pandemic. In Butte, an outbreak at a senior center has resulted in 5 deaths. 29 residents and 10 staff members tested positive there. The Continental Care and Rehabilitation Center's administrator says they are committed to keeping residents safe. He adds they've brought in professional help to try and manage the outbreak. The 5 deaths were added to Montana's total yesterday, which now sits at 411. Back here in Billings, demolition of the Metropark grandstands is moving along. Both sides of the roof came down yesterday, making the whole process around 65% done. There's still no official date set for when everything will be down. Workers are tearing down Monday through Friday, but weather has slowed them down and is set to continue in the coming days.